The penultimate episode of the final season of Game of Thrones begins with Varys writing letters that reveal Jon is really a Targaryen, and we could presume that Varys has tried to drum up support for Jon over Dany. Varys speaks to one of his little birds, Martha, and we find that Dany has locked herself away since the death of Missandei. It seems she's gone into a depression and is neglecting her duties as a monarch. Martha reveals that Dany isn't eating anything, implying that Varys is trying to poison her. Jon arrives at Dragonstone and is greeted by Varys, who tries to convince Jon to take the throne for himself, in front of loads of people in broad daylight. Varys quotes the old adage that states that every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin to decide if they'll be good or not. He says despite the fact he's already tried to poison Dany, he doesn't yet know which side her coin will land on, but he says he does know which side Jon's coin has landed. Varys seems convinced that Jon would make a great king, though that is debatable. Jon is certainly just and an excellent leader of men, but he's absolutely no experience when it comes to ruling or playing politics. Jon is an excellent man of action, but neither the audience nor Varys has shown any proof that he has what it takes to be a king. Jon, like Ned, is honourable to a fault, and I struggle to see him being able to stomach the kind of plotting and scheming that's required to keep the Seven Kingdoms in check. On the flip side, Dany has spent years doing exactly that. She successfully ruled in Meereen and even managed to unite the Dothraki, all without senseless bloodshed. I still don't understand why Varys, the dude who originally wanted to make this guy king, is now suddenly having second thoughts at the idea of Dany ruling. Tyrion discovers Varys' betrayal and informs Dany, who's looking pretty worn out following the previous episode. Rather than becoming angry, Dany simply accepts Varys' defection as another hurt she must bear. All of her true friends are dead, and the only ones left are doubting her, and even actively trying to undermine her claim. It's not really hard to see why Dany is feeling so isolated at this point. Daenerys has Varys executed, and he accepts his fate. Before he's killed, Tyrion admits that it was he who turned Varys in, which Varys takes pretty well, all things considered. Varys tells Tyrion that he hopes he deserves his death, that he hopes Dany won't turn out to be the monster he fears. Personally, I feel Dany's execution of Varys is pretty justified. So far, her only real crime is looking freaked out at a party in Winterfell, and yet Varys has already tried to have her poisoned. You could point out that Dany has done stuff in the past, like crucifying the slavers and burning the Tarleys, but Varys took all that in his stride back then. Now he's trying to murder Dany for being a bit of an outsider and looking uncomfortable at a party, and yet Dany is the one who's meant to look like the bad guy in this scene. Dany later gives Grey Worm the slave collar Missandei wore as a slave, which Grey Worm throws in the fire. Why Missandei would keep her slave collar is beyond me, but you can see that Grey Worm is just as eager for revenge as Dany. Dany then has a one-to-one with Jon where she confronts him over the fact that he told Sansa and Arya his real identity, despite the fact she begged him not to. Jon is yet another person she feels slipping away from her. Dany sees Sansa as a threat, and Jon chose Sansa over her. Can she trust him anymore? She tries to kiss him, but Jon pulls away. His faith in her has clearly been shaken since he found out they're related. Her execution of Varys probably didn't help either, but I imagine Jon probably understands why she did that, given that he did kill Olly, a child. Varys did commit treason. At this point, Dany decides that she will rule with fear if no one will love her. Dany begins her plans to attack King's Landing, and Tyrion urges her to cease the attack as soon as the bells ring and indicate Cersei's surrender. It's clear that Dany wants blood, but she agrees to Tyrion's terms. Again, I still don't understand why Tyrion and company are suddenly so distraught at the idea of the common folk suffering during times of war. What Dany is proposing is no different from literally every other war that has been fought in the history of Westeros. How many of the small folk were hurt during the War of the Five Kings alone? No one seemed to care then. Arya and the Hound arrive in Dragonstone, but the guards won't let them in. Arya tells the guard that she's going to kill Cersei. The Hound actually convinces the guard to let them in by saying that if Arya kills Cersei, thousands of lives will be saved, including the guards. It's funny to me that the Hound points this out, and yet Arya never bothers to tell either Jon or Dany this. So many problems could be solved if Arya told Jon and Dany her plans, and then she could kill Cersei and the city would almost certainly surrender peacefully to Dany. Arya could kill Cersei in the evening and Dany could rock up the next morning as the new queen. Only one person would have to die, problem solved. But no, Arya's far too edgy to be sharing her plans. In what may be one of the worst written scenes of the show, it is revealed that Jaime was captured on his way down to King's Landing. Apparently he forgot to hide his golden hand, something he did at the end of Season 7 when he was travelling up north after leaving King's Landing. Jaime shrugs this off by saying he's always been the stupidest Lannister, but at this point I begin to think Jaime makes Forrest Gump look like Einstein.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Tyrion frees Jaime, which is a nice callback to how Jaime once freed Tyrion, and he then tries to convince Jaime to go to King's Landing and persuade Cersei to surrender peacefully and to ring the bells. We get another staggeringly ill thought out line when Jaime says that he never cared much about the people of King's Landing. We learned in Season 3 that Jaime killed the king he'd sworn to protect in order to save the people of King's Landing, yet now Jaime doesn't care at all. He literally abandoned Cersei and risked his life to fight the White Walkers, to fight for the common folk. But now, after all he's been through, his goal at this point is just to run back and be with Cersei. I don't get it. It would have made a lot more sense if he'd chosen to return to Cersei to either convince her to surrender, or, if that failed, to kill her. Tyrion tells Jaime he's asked Davos for a favour, and has got him to smuggle a small boat near a drain by the Red Keep, so Jaime and Cersei might have a chance of escape. Even though Tyrion hates his Lannister name, I have enjoyed watching his conflict over going to war with his family, and this final act shows he still does love his family, at least Jaime. Though I hated parts of this scene, I did get pretty emotional watching the two Lannister boys say their farewells, and I've always liked how, despite all their flaws, Jaime was one of the only people in Tyrion's life to treat him well. Both Peter Dinklage and Nikolai Coster-Waldau acted the shit out of this scene. Great job, boys. The next morning, the siege of King's Landing begins, and Cersei is bringing the last of the common folk into the city to try and use them as a shield against Dany's dragon. Arya and the Hound manage to get into the city before the gates close, but Jaime is left outside. Cersei looks like she's in a pretty strong position here. We saw last episode that just a few of the Scorpions were able to kill Rhaegal and would have easily killed Drogon had Dany not retreated. However, Dany attacks Euron's fleet, which is filled to hundreds of Scorpions, and destroys them without much trouble. The only detail we get as to why Dany is now able to outmaneuver the Scorpions so easily is that she attacks with the sun behind her, though she moves a lot and I failed to see how one of the ships behind or beside her couldn't have taken her out. Still, Euron's fleet is destroyed and Euron is blasted into Blackwater Bay. The Golden Company, who have been hyped up for some time now, also proved to be pretty worthless. Cersei paid a lot of money for them and I'm guessing she wants her money back. Just as they're about to face off against the Unsullied and the Dothraki, Dany blasts the wall behind them with fire and causes many of them to be killed and injured. Jon and the ground forces easily overwhelm what's left of them and storm the city. Qyburn begins to get worried, but Cersei reminds him that all they need is one hit from the Scorpion to bring down Drogon. Unfortunately for Cersei, the Scorpion on the walls of King's Landing are just as useless as the ones on Euron's ship, and Dany is able to take them out no problem. The only resistance left are the Lannister soldiers, who are clearly starting to lose their will to fight. They're overwhelmed by the power of Dany's dragons and throw their weapons down and surrender to Jon. However, Cersei still refuses to surrender, and the common folk start shouting up at Cersei to surrender. I actually really like this detail. It shows how the common folk are little more than pawns to the High Lords, and we see how, despite the cries of the people, Cersei is willing to fight to the death of all. Soon all the Lannister forces have surrendered, and against Cersei's wishes, the bells are rung. This is it. Dany has got what she's always wanted. She's taken King's Landing without spilling the blood of the innocent, and there's nothing standing between her and the Iron Throne. All her dreams have come true, and yet it doesn't fulfill her like she always dreamed it would. Daenerys has lost so much and endured so much pain to get to this point, that even the Iron Throne doesn't seem worth it anymore. The pain and grief overwhelms her, and she snaps, and I think Emilia Clarke did an amazing job expressing the conflict and anguish she feels without even saying a word. Instead of going to arrest Cersei, she takes to the air and begins razing King's Landing to the ground, along with all the innocent common folk. Dany slowly but surely burns the city to ash, and by the end of the episode, most of the city is ruined, and hundreds of thousands have been killed. The death toll that Dany racks up in one siege outweighs all the deaths that characters like Ramsay, Tywin and Cersei could ever hope to have caused. The White Walkers probably haven't killed as many people as Dany. As I said, Dany has been through a lot by this point, but I still feel this massive change of heart has been incredibly rushed. I can see Dany potentially becoming a tyrant, but she got there way too fast in the show. She spent 7 seasons wanting to free the people from the cruel whims of the High Lords and to break the wheel, and yet now she suddenly has no reservations about indiscriminately massacring the innocent. Some have pointed out that Dany has been ruthless in the past, but those acts of ruthlessness were always targeted at other ruthless people. Dany was little more than a slave herself at the start of the show, and as a result she's always had a soft spot for the weak and innocent, yet here she is now, massacring them. Seeing Dany continue the attack, revenge-hungry Grey Worm begins attacking the ground forces who drop their weapons. A frenzy takes over the allied forces, and soon even the Northmen, who were usually seen as noble, are massacring, raping and pillaging. This siege started off with Jon and Dany's forces seeming like the good guys, but now it's the forces and people of King's Landing we're feeling sorry for. To be fair, the North has suffered greatly at the hands of the Lannisters. They lost Ned Stark, Robb Stark, and the War of the Five Kings, all due to the Lannisters. It's not hard to see why the Northmen are so eager for blood, but it's still hard to stomach their actions. All Jon can do is watch in horror as his allies go feral. Meanwhile, the Arya and the Hound have reached the Red Keep. The Hound wants to kill his brother the Mountain, and Arya wants to kill Cersei, who's been on her list for years. The keep is falling around all around them, and the Hound tells Arya to turn back. He tells the young Stark girl not to end up like him. Ever since he was burned as a child by his brother, the Hound's life has been consumed by rage, hatred and pain. The only thing that's kept him going has been his desire for revenge against his older brother, but the Hound's life hasn't been one worth living. He understands better than most, better than Arya, the dark road one goes down when they live only for revenge. He also knows deep down that even if he kills his brother, it won't make him happy. It won't undo the pain he feels. The Hound still thinks Arya has a chance of living a good life, and he doesn't want her to throw it all away for Cersei. The Hound knows that if Arya follows him any further, there's no coming back. She'll either literally die, or any good that's left in her will die, and she'll become what the Hound has been all these years, bitter, angry, and in pain. He knows it's too late for himself, but Arya needn't go down that path. I actually found this to be a great scene, and I love how Sandor has one final lesson for Arya: don't be like him. You can tell they genuinely care for each other by this point, and the Hound wants to spare Arya the pain he's endured all these years. Arya thanks the Hound, calling him by his real name, and turns back. Sandor finds the mountain along with Cersei and Qyburn at the very top of the Red Keep's tower. The mountain has shown great loyalty to Cersei, but seeing a chance at killing his younger brother is too much for him to resist. Qyburn foolishly tries to stop him, but the mountain smashes him to a wall, killing him. This reminded me of Frankenstein and how the mad scientist is killed by his creation. Cersei slinks away and Clegane Bowl begins. After delivering what should be a deadly blow, Sandor realizes that his brother can't be killed by conventional means. Knocking his helmet off, Sandor sees what a true monster his brother has become. He sacrifices his own life by pulling the mountain off the tower, and they both plunge into the raging fires below. Fire is pretty much the only thing that can kill Gregor at this point, and it's quite poetic how it was fire that started their hatred, and fire that will end it. At the very least, I hope Sandor has found some kind of peace. Having been locked out of the city, we see Jaime is using the secret entrance to the Red Keep which Davos hid his boat by. Jaime's just about to head into the tunnels when Euron appears, having been miraculously washed up just in the nick of time, because of course he was. Remember when in Season 3, after being blown into Blackwater Bay by Tyrion's wildfire plot, Davos had to cling to a tiny spit of rock and flag down a passing fishing boat? Well, apparently Euron could just swim back to King's Landing. Euron's appearance may be the biggest ex machina moment of the series, and that's really saying a lot. Euron and Jaime fight, and although I hate how convenient Euron's appearance was, I thought the two actors really went the extra mile to deliver a believable and brutal fight scene. When their weapons are lost, they resort to just brawling, and the way they just start beating on each other was very realistic. Jaime is mortally wounded by Euron, but eventually he gets the upper hand, no pun intended, and runs Euron through with his sword. Jaime continues on to Cersei, and Euron stares straight at the camera and declares his euphoria at being the man who's killed the infamous Jaime Lannister. Except he didn't kill Jaime Lannister. A pile of falling rocks will do that. Jaime finally reaches Cersei, and the two try and make a getaway from the destruction around them. Jaime leads Cersei back to the boat, but their way has been blocked by fallen rubble. Realizing this is finally the end, Cersei breaks down. Decades of fear and pain and anger consume her, and now she can't hide her terror any longer. She's scared for herself, for Jaime, and their unborn child. Jaime comforts Cersei and holds her close, telling her that they are the only people in the world that matter, which is something he said to her in Season 1. This does fly in the face of Jaime's character arc up to this point, but you could see it as his way of trying to comfort Cersei in their final moments. The room begins to collapse around them, and it's ironic that Cersei is going to be literally crushed by her ambitions. Many fans have pointed out that Cersei really didn't do a lot this season, and they do have a point. She mainly just stood around drinking wine. The plot thread about her being pregnant went nowhere. However, I still think Lena Headey did an amazing job with her, even in this season, and despite everything she's done, I still felt bad for Cersei in her final moments. I truly think Lena deserves an Emmy for her portrayal of Cersei Lannister, and I don't think anyone could have done it better. Bravo, Lena. Bravo. I have to admit that regarding Jaime, I'm pretty disappointed with his ending. Again, Nikolai continued to do an amazing job portraying the Kingslayer this season, and it's implied in interviews he's just as unhappy about Jaime's endings as the fan, but he still did an amazing job with what he was given. There have been a lot of hints in both the show and the books that Jaime would kill Cersei, and I thought that would happen, but it didn't. Instead, Jaime turned his back on Brienne and the new life he'd spent years forging and returned to the arms of Cersei. Jaime stated in the past that he and Cersei came into the world together and they will go out together, and he once told Bronn he wanted to die in the arms of the woman he loves, so the ending we got does fit to an extent, but I felt Jaime's growth as a character was undermined by him returning to Cersei in that way. I could have understood if he returned with the intent of killing her to save the city in one final act of redemption, but that wasn't his motive here. I will say that there is something tragic about his arc, about how he struggled so hard to be a better man, and did indeed become a better man, but in the end Cersei had her hooks too deep into him. Either way, this is the end of the two Lannister twins. Arya finds herself back in the streets of King's Landing and is confronted with the true horror of war. She sees innocent people being burned alive and watches as mothers desperately try to protect their children. Arya has seen death before, but not on this scale. Her badass assassin persona is torn away and she's struck by the terror of it all. She desperately tries to help the civilians, but it's no use. As a wise man once said,
"So much death, What can men do against such reckless hate?
For once, instead of ending lives, Arya is trying to save them. She's been fighting for death all these years, but now she's tried to preserve life instead of extinguish it. This scene was incredibly well shot, and Maisie Williams did an amazing job portraying Arya's overwhelmed emotions in the face of all this destruction. The scene reminded me of images I've seen in the aftermath of the atomic bombings of Japan, the carnage of 9/11 and the London Blitz. Dragons have been compared to nuclear weapons, and here we see that in full effect. Nothing can withstand them. It looks like Arya may be lost in all the destruction, but then she sees a pale horse. She manages to mount it and flees to the city. The horse's white complexion is probably a reference to the pale horse that signifies death in the Bible, and some have noted that it might be the white horse being ridden by the leader of the Golden Company. Some speculate the horse's calm nature in the face of all the chaos could mean it's being walked by Bran to help Arya escape, though this is never confirmed. Thus our episode ends. It's probably the bleakest episode we've ever seen, even worse than the Red Wedding. Sure, the Red Wedding had more of a punch to it because we were so attached to the characters that died, but the death toll was nothing compared to what we've seen here. Here's hoping the final episode will give us at least a glimmer of hope for the future of Westeros. This episode didn't offend me as much as the last two, but I still think it was poorly written and that Dany's arc of turning into a tyrant is being rushed and ruined. I was greatly impressed by the direction, the acting and the effects, but it's hard to enjoy these things when the writing is so subpar. That's it folks, join me next time when I'll be reviewing the final episode of Game of Thrones. If you enjoyed this video then please give it a like, leave a comment and share it with your friends, that really helps my channel to grow. If you're new here then feel free to subscribe, I put out at least a video a week and cover everything from video games to films to books. See you next time.